Hello, my name's Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Fantasias by Julian. And this orchestral work was written in 2009, premiered by the Cleveland Orchestra, who commissioned it. And I actually heard this performed at the Royal Festival Hall in 2011, conducted by Vladimir Jurowski with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and indeed that's the CD of that performance there, along with some other Julian Anderson pieces. Julian Anderson is one of the foremost British contemporary composers, and he really does have an interesting voice. This piece, Fantasias, actually perplexed me somewhat when I first heard it, but like all great pieces of art, something draws you back to them, and indeed I've returned to this piece and I've studied it recently. Now, Fantasias, the title, perhaps refers to this capricious nature of this music. Indeed, Anderson himself says this in the programme notes. The tradition of the Fantasia in Western music is that of caprice and deliberate willfulness on the surface of the music, as in the wonderful keyboard fantasias of C.P.E. Bach. And indeed, when you listen to these fantasias, there's 5 of them, you're taken aback by the sheer volume of ideas. It's one thing after another, with sudden contrasts in dynamics, in timbre, in speed, etc. And it's a real breathtaking, exhilarating ride through these fantasias. Not to say there's no continuity at all within this orchestral work. Certain ideas crop up again in later movements, so that gives the piece a sense of unity. But generally, the philosophy of this music really is a succession of ideas which leave a lasting impression on the listener. Now, the first Fantasia is for the brass section alone, and it's a really striking opening to this piece of music. The opening movement is actually in 6 sections or 6 parts, and the opening part, which I call A, and by the way, if you want to follow the music more closely, I've put a description of each of the movements down below with bar numbers. And the opening movement of Fantasia begins with this trumpet fanfare like this. It reminds me of the opening of Petrushka by Stravinsky. Similar idea, like this. And the second part, which is very short, is this kind of jazzy idea. Even reminds me a little bit of Bernstein's West Side Story, weirdly enough. And then we get to this new idea, this new kind of jaunty tune we hear in the trumpet, something like this. Got this kind of syncopated idea. We come to this section where these ideas are refracted and split apart. The music seems to dissolve into this kind of triplet motion in the next section. And then the movement comes to a head with this kind of culmination of these fanfares, with these crashing chords. And this impressive movement ends with a triple F gesture. The second Fantasia employs the whole orchestra, and this really is a kind of helter-skelter ride through the imagination of Julian Anderson. You know, there must be about 10 or so sections in this short movement, and we begin with this this clarinet melody. It reminds me a little bit of Bartok. There's just a bit of a folkiness about some of this music. We have this. This clarinet melody is actually based on that four-note motif from the opening brass fanfare in Fantasia 1. Da, 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 da. And that gives a sense of unity in this piece because it's there's so many wildly contrasting episodes, some of them extremely short. It's easy to perhaps get lost in this music, but there are moments of continuity, and this is one of them. Actually, that motif appears later on in the piece as well, most notably at the end of the third Fantasia. And this movement progresses with these wildly extravagant woodwind lines, this very high E-flat clarinet. We have this section, the C section, which crops up twice in this movement. It's one of the rare times an idea is repeated. We have this chaotic moment with all these pizzicato strings coming in. Reminds me of a Bernard Herrmann score there. And then the music just carries on with these more memorable, jazzy, syncopated ideas. The third Fantasia is rather marvellous. It's this very slow, almost still music. And it's a moment of respite for the listener because structurally it's very simple compared to the other Fantasias. Julian Anderson says that himself actually. And this Fantasia is said to represent the kind of nocturnal life possibly of a rainforest. And we have all these birds tweeting everywhere in these rather wonderful bird calls, some of which remind us of the fanfares from the first movement and perhaps one or two ideas from the second movement as well, the second Fantasia. And there's lots of interesting bowing techniques used in the strings in this music. And we have these, every section ends with a pause, so it's quite easy to follow this movement. It's music which brims with life, this. Although it's very slow and it's very still, it's certainly not dead. It's there's so much going on in the textures, and it's an example of Julian Anderson really having such a virtuosic handling of the orchestra and really trying to get every ounce of potential out of the symphony orchestra here. It ends with a kind of coda, I call it section D, where we have a brief reminiscence of that four-note motif from the original fanfare at the beginning of the first Fantasia. The fourth Fantasia is about a minute long. It's a miniature, and it's a double theme and variations really. We have two ideas which continually come back and are varied each time. And it's said to have something of the energy of a Tom and Jerry cartoon. We have this rather queasy piccolo solo which gets us going, almost like a hornpipe. And then we have this odd halting idea on the strings. I find it quite amusing actually, it's like this. You hear that idea throughout, varied. It's a piece which just flies by, and before you know it, you reach the coda, and the coda's interesting. We have this grand, massive crescendo from 3 Ps to 3 Fs, I think it is. And then all of a sudden, that coda seems to collapse in on itself, and this kind of more spectral version of the coda is revealed. And the music just disintegrates in front of our eyes or our ears. Really a brilliant way to end this Fantasia. The fifth Fantasia really is a fitting summation of this work. A bit like the second Fantasia, it's just a succession of ideas, almost dances in a way. It reminds me a bit of, going back to Stravinsky, something like the when you listen to one of his ballet scores and there's a succession of dances getting more and more intense and rhythmically complicated. And it's like that, I think, with this fifth Fantasia, certainly. We begin with this clap of the whip or the router with these flurrying semiquavers, and that provides a kind of signal post in this music, a much needed one actually. We have a succession of ideas, and I've just to remind you, I've put everything down below in the description if you're following this music with a score, or indeed if you want to have a deep listen to this music. Eventually we get this idea on the violins. And the movement just continues headlong, one idea after another, sudden switches in mood, in tone. This is music full of contrast. There's at least, I think, 25 ideas with a coda. And again, very little's repeated. We might hear snatches of ideas from previous movements. But the music's like that, it's very episodic. But it is a thrilling end to this 5-movement piece of orchestral virtuosity, which is Julian Anderson's Fantasias. Please have a listen to it. The CD's here, and you can stream it. And thanks for watching.